Good to see you. I'm glad that we could all be together today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mr. Edelheit. I also teach 8th grade ELA, 2 doors down from Mr. Van Zee. I am giving this introduction, I'm having this conversation, because I don't really like to call it a lecture, with pretty much every 8th grader in the entire building today. So why am I having this conversation with you as opposed to Ms. Kaiser, Mr. Kemmer, one of the social studies teachers? I have this conversation with you because I am in a very unique position that no other teacher in this building is in. The social studies teachers know facts. They can give you those facts. For me, this issue is personal. I am Jewish. If you maybe don't know anyone who is Jewish, now you do. My father is a rabbi. That is the spiritual leader of the Jewish community. He's like a pastor. This issue is particularly personal to me because 28 people in my family were gassed and cremated at Auschwitz and Treblinka. My family. So I'm in a position that is very different than any other teacher in this building, including the social studies teachers. This issue, this topic, is something that the Jewish community takes very seriously. So the first thing I will do before we say anything else is I will thank you. And I thank you because this is a heavy topic. This is hard to talk about and hard to learn about and depressing. The Jewish community bears the burden, the weight of the Shoah every day. 6 million Jews were killed between 1938 and 1945. It makes sense that this is something that the Jewish community continues to teach about and learn about and study and cry over. But this isn't your burden. So I thank you for being willing to take this journey with me, with Mr. Van Zee, with each other. This is going to be a hard month. This is not an easy topic. You are going to get sad. You're going to get angry. You're going to feel nauseous and sick. All of those are appropriate reactions to studying the Holocaust. We take this journey together so we can use each other as a resource. When you're angry, when you're sad, lean on each other. Talk to each other. Makes this easier. Before I want to start talking, and I could have this conversation with you for days. Last year, I took 2 days. This year, I'm only going to take 1. But before we start, I want to ask you, what do you know already? What do you know? What do you think you know? What have you heard about this time period in Europe, 1938 to 1945? World War II. Okay? What else do we know? Think we know? What have we heard?
I heard that Jews in Denmark went to Sweden for
Went into hiding. Jewish families hid, and that is really the foundation of the text we're going to start reading tomorrow, The Diary of Anne Frank, is about a German family that moved to the Netherlands that then hides in an attic for 4 years. What else do we know? Think we know. What have we heard? Okay, Adolf Hitler was the leader of Germany at the time. What else? Nothing? That's okay. That's why we're having this conversation. Okay, this is good. All of these things are true and correct. And we will touch on all of those things in the next little while as we're having this conversation. The first thing I like to do is make sure we have a common vocabulary. Because if we're having conversations about this issue over the next 4 weeks, as we have conversations, I want to make sure everybody understands what everybody else is saying. So the first thing we need is a common vocabulary. So, what do we call this time period? Patrick said, well, this is World War II. What's the problem with calling this World War II?
Because World War II was fought in other places too.
Exactly. World War II took place in Europe and in Japan. While what happened in World War II in Japan is unbelievably important to history, especially considering that's when we dropped the atomic bomb, for our purposes, we are not at all interested in what happened in Japan. So we're not going to call this World War II. You've probably heard this term before. Who has heard or seen this term, Holocaust? This is what it's called in your history book. Maybe you've read some Holocaust literature before. Who's read a piece of Holocaust literature? So what do we have? We have The Book Thief. Who's read The Book Thief? Great book. Number the Stars. Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Anybody read other things?
Mouse.
Mouse. Fantastic. That's like way up here, right? Mouse, you read Mouse when you get to high school. Holocaust is the preferred term. Holocaust is okay. That is what the general population uses when we talk about this time period. The Jewish community, however, does not like the word Holocaust. We have tried to move away from that word, and here's why. Holocaust is a Greek word originally. Holocaust meant a burnt sacrifice. So in ancient times, you would make a holocaust. You would go and get a goat, and you'd kill it, and you'd burn it and offer it up to Zeus. And it was a religious offering. The Jewish community does not like that word. And because we don't want to think that 6 million Jews were killed and sacrificed for something. We don't need the religious connection to the word. I don't want to think anybody was sacrificed for something. That makes sense? Yeah. So, we have moved away from this word, the Jewish community has. The word we use now, the word I hope you will start using, is Shoah. S-H-O-A-H. Shoah. Shoah is a modern Hebrew word that means unthinkable. And as we have this conversation over the next half an hour, you will understand why that is the correct term to use. Because this period in Europe between 1938 and 1945 truly was unthinkable. 11 million people were killed by the Nazi war machine. Can you imagine 11 million anything? The number is just too big. And then to take a number which already is too hard to imagine and connect it to an action which is so horrific. Why would we ever want to think about that? It is truly unthinkable. There is nothing wrong with this word, Holocaust. If you use this word, it's not like I'm going to find you and say, no, don't use that word anymore. The goal is we're taking this journey together, we're learning together. When you have conversations with each other, use this word. When you go home tonight and your mom says, what'd you do in ELA today? And you say, Edelheit, we had a conversation. It was real heavy. And she says, well, what was the conversation about? You can say, he gave us his introduction to the Shoah. And she'll say, Shoah? I've never heard that word before. Teach her what it means. Teach her why it's a better word than this word. So that's the first thing I like to do. That's the first important step, is we have a common vocabulary. So when I say Van Zee says, one of your colleagues says Shoah, you know what they're talking about. The next thing we need is the common foundation of history. Now, the problem is, I could talk to you for a week and still not talk about all of the important things that happened between 1938 to 1945. You can take whole college semesters on the history of the Shoah. I've got 30 minutes, and I have other things I need to talk about. So I'm going to give you 6 dates. I think these are 6 key dates. First date, 1933. 1933, Adolf Hitler is elected to be the leader of Germany. Germany is a democracy, and people vote, and they voted for Hitler. That's the first thing you gotta know. This wasn't a military, he just takes power. The people voted for him. 1933, end of World War I. Who can tell me, what is the German economy like at the end of World War I?
Really bad.
It's awful. The Germans were forced to pay all the war bills from World War I. They were broke. And Adolf Hitler is elected, and he looks at the country that's broke and says, well, we need to blame somebody for being broke. We're going to blame the Jews. So between 1933 and 1938, well, I got to take one step back. 2 weeks after Adolf Hitler is elected, he burns down Parliament. The German Parliament building is called the Reichstag. That would be like President Obama burning down Congress and telling the Senate and the House of Representatives, just go home. I'm in charge now. That's what Adolf Hitler did. Burns down Parliament, sends everybody home, and now the Nazis are in total control. The economy is terrible. They blame the Jews. And from 1933 to 1938, this is the next date, this is when the Nuremberg laws are passed. And the Nuremberg laws are laws across Germany that start to isolate and come down on the Jewish community. So it's laws like, you're not allowed to go to the same school as your friends anymore. You're Jewish, you're different. It's laws like you need to wear a star on the outside of your clothing at all times so everyone knows you're a Jew. It's laws like that business that your family has owned for 150 years, you don't own it anymore. And not only do you not own it, we're giving it to him. That house that your family has lived in for 150 years, you don't live there anymore. We just gave it to him. You're not allowed to be outside of your house after 8 o'clock at night. You're not allowed to shop at the same grocery store. You're Jewish, you're different. And they isolate this community. And then November 10th, 1938, Kristallnacht. It's a German word that means the night of broken glass. And the evening of November 10th, 1938, Jewish businesses are vandalized and burnt to the ground. Jewish synagogues, which is our house of prayer, burnt to the ground. And Jewish families are dragged from their houses and beaten in the streets. So let me ask you this question. If we have 5 years here, 33 to 38, and all of these new laws are being passed, why do you think people, not everybody, left? Because certain people did leave, but not everybody. Why don't you think they didn't leave? You heard this earlier. People didn't leave Germany because they didn't think that way. They said, I've been living in Germany. My family has lived here for 200 years. I'm not Jewish. I'm German. I'm not one of those Jews with the big black hats and the beards and the curly sideburns, those really religious. That's not me. I'm German. They're not going to come for me. They're going to come for those guys over there with the beards. It's not because they were scared. It's not because the Germans passed laws telling them they couldn't leave. They didn't think it was going to happen to them. They were naive. So November 10th, 1938, Kristallnacht, at this point, if you hadn't left, it was too late. A month later, the Germans march into Poland and take over Poland, and then World War II has started officially, and now it's too late to leave. 1938 to 1942, the Jews are a slave labor force for the German war machine. 1938 to 1942, we don't have a lot of death camps. We have work camps. And Jews are sent to work. You build tanks. You build bullets. You build the things that the Germans need to win the war. The next key date comes in 1942. 1942, we get Der Endschluss. It's the final solution. The final solution to what? The final solution to the Jewish question. And in 1942, the Nazis decided their ultimate goal was to exterminate every Jew in Europe. Every Jew in Europe. So in a moment, we're going to talk about numbers. 6 million Jews killed between 38 to 45. But 6 million was not the goal. It's another thing I need you to remember. 6 million wasn't the goal. 6 million was how far they got by the time the war ended. The goal, every Jew in Europe. If the war had gone on a week longer, the number would have been 6.5 million. In 1942, they decide, we're going to kill them all. 42 to 45 is when you see the mass extermination. Auschwitz, which I will talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. Auschwitz was the chief extermination camp, death camp that the Nazis used. At its highest rate, they were killing 1,000 people a day. In 1945, the war ends. The camps are liberated by the Allied troops. 1945, we are finally able to truly see the toll of the war. And that is 11 million people. The Nazis exterminated 11 million people. 6 million Jews. Of the 6 million Jews, 1 million children under the age of 10. But one of the really important reasons I bring up the statistic, the number, because like I said a minute ago, the number doesn't matter. That was just how far they got. But I like for you to know, 6 million Jews, that's why this is mine. That's why this is my story and my issue. But 5 million other. 5 million homosexuals, people with special needs, physical or mental handicap, Poles, Soviets, Gypsies, Communists, Catholics, African Americans, American prisoners of war. So while I am in a unique position to talk to you about this, because the biggest percentage of the number came from my community, this is not a Jewish issue. This is a human issue. Think about the people who make up your circle of friends. How many people would have fallen into this 5 million? Unless you are blonde hair, blue-eyed, Christian, you were in this group. All of a sudden, I have a feeling that would be a lot of us. This isn't a Jewish issue. This is a human issue. That is yet another reason why this is so important for you to study. So, we talked about language, okay? We talked about dates and numbers, okay? You can get that stuff from a history teacher. Here is where I think I bring a perspective and a thought process that are very different than anyone else. What I want to talk to you about now is the nature of evil. Because the evil that existed in Europe between 1938 and 1945 is unlike anything that ever came before it and unlike anything that has happened since. You have never seen, thought of, dealt with evil on a level like this. Raise your hand if you like horror movies. Those stupid Paranormal Activity and Saw, cut your face off. Okay. There is nothing evil in that. Sure, there may be a little creepy, a little scary, but that's not evil. Not real evil. The evil we're talking about here is systemic evil. This is maybe a new word for you, but there should be a root that you recognize here. What word do you see within the word systemic? System. The whole system was evil. Every action that the German government took between 1938 and 1945 was connected to something sinister and wrong. And that's not something that as 21st century Americans, we understand. Everything the Germans did, the whole system, was evil. So here is how I help that make more sense. Raise your hand if you would consider yourself a math person. You like math, you're good at math. Okay, what's your name? Jacob. Here you go, Jacob. I'm going to give you a word problem, okay? Now, this story I'm about to tell you is a true story. Jacob, you work for IG Farben. IG Farben was a German pharmaceutical company that manufactured Zyklon B. Zyklon B was the gas that they used in the gas chambers. So, 1942, a guy comes up, works at IG Farben, comes to one of the people who work for him and says, Jacob, I need you to figure this math out. I need for you to figure out what is the fastest way to kill the most amount of people for the least amount of money. Please figure that math out for me. What? Is that a math problem you've ever gotten from Sellers? What is the quickest way to kill the most amount of people for the least amount of money? That is messed up. The math problem is evil. It is a product of a system. That is evil. I didn't ask Jacob to kill anybody. All I asked him to do was some math. You want to know the really messed up part? He did the math. The guy did the math, and you know what he found out? Is it was 1/2 cent cheaper to throw babies into the fire alive than it was to gas them first. You saved 1/2 cent of gas. 1/2 cent. It's just a word problem. It's just math. But the math is the product of a system that is evil. We have seen nothing like this since Germany in 1945. The closest we've come to systemic evil on a level like this is the genocides that have happened, unfortunately, in Africa, 60s, 80s, 90s, Somalia, Ethiopia, Darfur. but I hesitate to connect those topics. When you start doing your research in a couple of weeks, we're going to give you the option. You get to choose what you want to research. Some of you will choose to research the Shoah. Some of you might choose to research those African genocides. I don't want to compare them. They are each unique. And here is why. Because I don't want to say that the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust are more important than the people killed in Darfur, in Somalia, in Ethiopia. They're equally as important. It's different. I never like to compare genocide to other genocide. There's not one that's worse than the next. The way they're similar, however, is the following. In Europe as well as in Africa, these actions were committed by a government that was looking to control the people through fear and force. If I make you scared enough of me, you will do whatever I tell you to do. Because you're afraid that maybe you're next. That's what happened in Germany. That's what happened in Africa. So now we say, well, why us? We're just 8th graders, Mr. E. Why are you making us study this heavy, depressing stuff? We got plenty of time for this. Why do we have to do this now? Because right now, we have the opportunity to hear his story. We can hear and talk to and interview people who survived and hear their stories. My wife's grandmother, one of 4 sisters who survived the war. They were all taken from their homes in 1941. They were split up. All 4 of them were sent to different camps. 1946, after the war ends, in a displaced persons camp in Poland, they found each other after 5 years separated and a war. We have the opportunity to hear the stories of survivors and share them. And we are far more willing to listen when you are listening to his story. This happened to me. Now here's the problem. We, and I include myself and Mr. Van Zee in the statement, we will be the generation that witnesses the last survivor die. They're getting old. My wife's grandmother is 88, her eldest sister is 93. They survived the darkest time in history to lead positive and fulfilling lives after the war. And now, unfortunately, they're getting old. And when the last survivor dies, what was his story becomes history. And when it's history, it's something we read about in a textbook, or we watch a show on the Discovery Channel. But it's not important to me anymore. It's history. It happened in the past. Something like the Shoah can never be history. Because what happens if we let something like this become history? People will forget. And what happens when people forget? It might happen again. And unfortunately, it already has. In Darfur, and Somalia, and Bosnia. So we have to keep learning. We have to keep telling these stories. This can never become history, people. The last thing I want to leave you with is going to take us back to that idea of the nature of evil. You're taken from your homes, 1943. You're forced into a train car, a cattle car. Who's ever seen a cattle car connected to a train? 120 people crammed into that cattle car. They tell you, grab a suitcase, grab everything that's important to you. You got 5 minutes. So you fill up one suitcase and you grab your family. They force you into a train car. There's no food. There's no water. There's no beds. There's a bucket in the corner if you need to go to the bathroom. You're in the train car for a week. The train finally stops. You're hot, you're tired, you're hungry, you don't feel well. The train car door is thrown open. There are men with guns, loud barking dogs. You have arrived at Auschwitz. They pull you from the train car and they separate you. Men and women who look strong over here. The elderly, the weak, and children over here. They take your suitcase. The elderly and the weak and the children are told you've been on the train for a week. Wouldn't you like a shower? Hot water. Clean yourself. They were so excited at the thought. They all marched into a room with shower heads. They locked the door and they gassed. And then those strong enough to work moved the bodies from the gas chamber to the crematory and threw them in the fire. Auschwitz has been turned into a museum now. I've been there. Walked the train tracks where people got off the train. Part of the museum is a series of long connected rooms, and the rooms are split in half by a huge piece of glass. In the first room, you stand on one side, and on the other side of the glass is suitcases. Floor to ceiling, wall to wall. Empty suitcases. Then you walk into the next room. It's full of eyeglasses. Floor to ceiling, wall to wall. Thousands of pairs of glasses. You go into the next room, and it is full of shoes. Big shoes, children's shoes, fancy, shiny leather shoes, old, beat up, muddy shoes. Once you arrived at Auschwitz, they didn't care where you came from or how rich you were. You were a Jew. You move from the room of shoes into the next room. This was where I had the most trouble, is a room full of hair. Long hair, short hair, gray hair, dark hair. Because when they pulled you off the train, the first thing they did was shave your head and tattoo a number on your arm. You are no longer Dane, you are now 56342. It's one of the reasons why the Jewish community doesn't get tattoos. We were tattooed once. We don't do it anymore. Then you move from that final room full of hair into a room full of empty tin cans. Who's ever opened a tin can before? Soup, tuna, some other sort of food. Just empty tin cans. The tin cans had been full of Zyklon B, the pellets that were used to make the gas. And much like there was a guy who did the math, there was a guy whose job it was just to open tin cans. He didn't shoot anybody. He didn't even pour the gas into the gas chamber. All he did was open the can. But just like the math problem, when the evil is systemic, even the act of opening a tin can can be evil. We're going to start this reading tomorrow in class. It is going to be difficult. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get upset. When you do, as I said, lean on each other. If you have questions while you are reading, if you are my student, ask me. Stop me in the middle of whatever I am doing and ask me. And if you are one of Van Z's students, do the same. Stop him. Ask him the question. And if he doesn't know, he'll ask me. I want to thank you for being ready to take this journey with us. This is not going to be easy, but I think it could be the most important work you do all year. Have a wonderful rest of your day.